you, David, for your kind introduction. Luca, am I coming through on audio okay? All right, sensational. Good morning, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Rob Dawson, and I was here last year facilitating the equivalent panel, and it was a really good time. We had a lot of good fun, and we had some amazing guests sitting on our panel, and we intend to do the same again this year. So our topic this year is a little bit different. We're talking about workplace surveillance and wellness, and I think it's probably appropriate to have an IT dude up here talking about workplace surveillance. It is something I do get asked about quite commonly, and we do get accused of maybe overstepping our reach at times. So workplace surveillance, when we talk about what is workplace surveillance, it is the monitoring of employees by employers. It can impact work quality, safety, security, compliance, privacy. There's actually lots of good areas that surveillance can be used appropriately in the workplace, but there's obviously the opposite side of that as well. Some examples of it may include using software or hardware to track employees' keystrokes and mouse clicks, and we've all seen lots of stuff in the media about that over COVID while everybody was working from home. It might even be just looking at their web browsing history, their email content, their chat messages. It can be requiring employees to use cameras, microphones, biometric sensors, bits and pieces. I know that for me, something personally I did with my team many years ago is I would always have the morning check-in in my old business. I had a remote team. Morning check-in, everyone had to have their camera on first thing in the morning. So, that in itself is a piece of workplace surveillance. And accessing employees' personal devices. So, networks or spaces to collect or inspect information. And as an IT professional, it is something that we do in some capacity under the guise of security. So there's some of the things that we may be covering as part of our topic and discussion today. So the other thing is that workplace surveillance can affect the work-home boundary. So with lots of people working from home, those boundaries start to become a little bit blurred. What's your workplace? What's your office? Is that equipment yours? You're accessing company information on it? Where is the line? Where's the line in the sand? So, we'll be covering a little bit of that today and how that can impact your wellness. And I think that's probably the most important piece that we want to take away from today's panel discussion is how does workplace surveillance impact on an individual's wellness in the workplace. So please join me in welcoming our panelists up to their, I think there's only 3, but there's 4 chairs. Maybe one was for me to come and sit in as well. But please join me in welcoming our panelists. We have Seamus Burke, who is a partner at Spark Helmore Lawyers. Diane Bunch from New Psych. And Stacey Kelly from Seed People Consulting. It's a good question. I don't know. I was actually going to put my timer on over here so that I could make sure that we don't get too out of hand, but I feel like I'm sitting back a little bit too far from you guys. All right, let me set up how long do we have? An hour? All right, timer's underway. Very good.
So loose and flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, right, for each answer you have a specific amount of time. So we were laughing when we were preparing for this event and the things, and the topics that we were going to talk about. And one of the things that I find somewhat entertaining is kicking off, an event on wellness with things that you can get sent to jail for. I thought that was pretty funny. So we're going to start there. And this question is particularly directed for you, Seamus. Are there legislative requirements around workplace surveillance? And working within that framework, what is best practice for workplace surveillance?
Thank you, Rob, and it's a pleasure to be invited and have a chance to talk to you this morning about these topics. So in New South Wales we have a statute, the Workplace Surveillance Act, that's been operative for close to 20 years. That sets a bit of a framework in respect of both what they call overt, so open surveillance, but also covert, so secret surveillance. you'll be pleased to know that covert surveillance can't take place in the workplace without a magistrate signing off on an authority and giving approval for that. But the most common type is the surveillance that we see in pretty much every workplace. So it's computer surveillance or camera surveillance, and then also GPS tracking surveillance, so GPS devices that are fitted to, say, particularly a vehicle or something like that. So there are, the Act requires notification to be given to employees before the surveillance is commenced. There's a number of requirements in respect of what the notice must include, and then there are rules around where the surveillance can take place, and particularly where it can't take place. And then also there's rules around what use can be made of surveillance records that are obtained once the notification has been given. So I guess best practice, Rob, to me would be ensuring that employees understand if there is surveillance, so having a clear policy on that, making sure that there's some training around the policy so that the terms of the policy are clearly understood. And then I think these sorts of policies are not ones where you just set and forget. They're ones that need to be considered regularly in respect of how your business uses surveillance and how it adapts over time if your business changes. And we've seen, I think, the reference to COVID and working from home saw a significant change to the focus of surveillance in respect of employees.
As a follow-up question to that, and maybe before we throw it across to our other panellists, what are the implications of getting it wrong?
I'd like to say a lot. Maybe you're not going to go to jail. Probably would be the main one that you could probably start with. The reality is, if you don't have a notice in place and you seek to use surveillance that's taken say particularly in the Fair Work Commission, the Fair Work Commission can refuse to admit evidence that has been obtained in that way. So, for instance, if you have email or internet usage that shows that an employee is not doing their job but are spending time watching YouTube, videos on YouTube, and you don't have that notification given to them, then you may find yourself unable to rely upon that evidence before the Commission.
Yeah, that's very insightful. I think probably from my perspective, people come, so as an IT provider, people come to me and go, oh, hey Rob, feel like my employees might be just noodling about and not actually doing their job. Is there any way that we can sort of track them or surveil them? For me personally, I'm like, I don't think the surveillance is the issue, but okay, we can certainly investigate that. And it's good to have an understanding. When somebody does ask me, I can go, maybe you should have a look at legislative requirements before you even consider asking me to do that, and what you are and are not allowed to do. And I do like that piece around covert versus overt sort of surveillance operation within an organisation. That's very good to understand, so thank you for that. Would any of our other panellists like to contribute further to that? He's pretty good. I think that's why he gets paid the big bucks, isn't it? Very good. So I think, and probably touching on that sort of covert piece, I would hate to think that I was being covertly surveilled. And as an example of this, we were very clear about, hey guys, guess what? We're recording here this morning. Cameras are pointing this direction, so you guys aren't going to end up on YouTube or TikTok or any of those other social media platforms where you may or may not want to be. But the covert thing, I think, can potentially cause distrust in an organisation. And something that I'd like to understand a bit further about that, and this is probably a question directed to you, Diane, is how can surveillance cause distrust amongst staff within a workplace environment?
Great question, Rob. Trust is the cornerstone of any relationship, whether that be a personal relationship or whether it would be with your colleagues in the workplace. You need trust to be able to connect with each other in a workplace, to collaborate with each other. We all want these workplaces where everyone's working together. So trust is so very important. I've got a bit of a case study for you. Holland, Cooper and Hecker in 2014, they had a look at the relationship between electronic monitoring surveillance in the workplace and whether employees had trust of their management team. So this particular workplace that they watched were monitoring emails, they were monitoring different clicks on different websites, they were monitoring people clocking in, clocking out, they had security cameras in their buildings, they were monitoring vehicles, company vehicles, where they were going, where were they stopping, how long were they stopping for, etc. So lots of monitoring was happening. And then they found, surprise, the employees did not trust management. Well, you don't need to be a psychologist to know why. Definitely that distrust in the workplace. But let's have a look at the reasons why. Our brain is designed to detect trust and distrust through conversations every day. So trust is linked to oxytocin. I feel safe, I feel relaxed. You know, that oxytocin, this is a nice workplace. I feel quite relaxed here, I'm connecting with my employees. But if we don't, if we detect that distrust, our amygdala in our brains is like the guard dog. Have you ever seen the guard dog? They're up against the fence. Oh, I need to protect my owner, there's the mailman, quick, quick. So that's what our brain is like. Constantly protecting us, wants to look out for us. And when we sense that distrust, our brain is like, oh, I always have to be on. I have to be on guard. Oh, I have to make sure I don't click on that bad website. Oh no, I did click on that website. Oh, what are they going to do? And it starts. And then you're lying in bed and it's late at night. And you're like, why did I click on that website? Silly me, I shouldn't have clicked on that website. Oh, I'm usually so good. Oh, I'm so hopeless. Oh, stupid me. And what happens then is that ripple effect. We start to realise that we start to be tired and we start to question, why am I at that workplace? They don't want me there, they just are out to get me. It's also that ripple effect where you bring it home. You're so frustrated in the workplace because I need to do 200 clicks in 5 minutes, and if I don't, what's going to happen? And then you go home, you get frustrated with your children. Mum, Dad, can you play with me? No, leave me alone. You just want to kind of relax. And so it's that ripple effect. It can affect those personal relationships in your life as well. Have you ever been in a scary situation? You're sitting on a train, for example, it's late at night, there's some people that you're not quite sure about. We get on guard. Our amygdala, that bulldog at the gate, jumps on in and says, protect yourself. How are you going to protect you? You start looking for the exits. You start looking, where is the train guard? You hold your keys really close, your mobile phone even tighter. And then you're on high alert, what's going to happen to me? But you get out, you go home, and then you can relax. Imagine being on guard 8 hours a day in your workplace, because your workplace is suddenly your dinosaur that you have to protect yourself. It's not a very nice feeling. So we don't want to always be on alert. You don't, your employees don't. So I think that's a big thing to remember.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, I think I just had an epiphany. I can sort of start to understand why maybe people don't like the IT people. So I think following on from that, that's actually probably a really good segue into our next question. And that's, how do we build a culture of trust? And I'm going to take notes on this so I can build a culture of trust with my clients who, yes, we're sort of monitoring all the things that they do, but it's security, right? It's fine. Stacey, I know that you're great at building teams and building trust within organisations. Can you elaborate on how we can build trust within our business?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So if they're thinking about trust, and I think how we build trust, Diane's covered the why, right? So why we build trust and why trust is so important. That oxytocin, the joy, engagement is the HR terminology, I guess, how we boost engagement. But the reason why that engagement is so important is we know how closely it's linked to productivity. I'm going to hold it out here. I don't know why I'm feeding back. Anyway, not Hunter Business, sorry. The Harvard Business Review did a research paper a couple of years ago around building trust and the impact of trust, and it found that high trust organisations had 76% higher engagement, 50% higher productivity, 13% lower sick leave. So the impact that we see there, 74% lower stress, and that's the bad stress as opposed to the good stress. So we need some level of stress to keep us going. But that kind of data talks to us around, in a workplace in particular, why it's so important. The how we build trust really goes back into that neuroscience and what we're looking for, what our brains are looking for, as Diane talked to. And we're thinking about things like having boundaries. So we're thinking about things like having certainty, knowing how you're going to turn up. So if I don't know exactly how you're going to turn up each day as my manager, then I am the guard dog on alert. Oh, what's it going to be like today when I walk in? Oh man, and you can feel that tension and that stress that impacts physiologically a whole body. So we're thinking about building trust. We're thinking about how do we talk to each other about what the word trust means. When you show that you're trusting me, this is what I see. When you show that you respect me, this is what I see. Things such as having integrity, doing what I say I'm going to do. Things like having accountability, being really clear on what are the behaviours that I will accept and the things that I won't accept. Also this idea of making mistakes. As a leader, we know that for innovation, and we need to have innovation in our organisations for us to progress and become better and blah, blah, blah. But we can't have innovation without having trust, and we can't have trust without that ability to make a mistake and be okay with it. And it's not just standing up and saying, cool, you can make mistakes, go for it. It's when someone makes a mistake, what do you do next? Right? So we are going to be conditioned by how you respond to that. So you've got to make sure that you walk the talk, not just say the wonderful things, not just have the wonderful policies, but think about how do you actually put that into practice. And then it's checking in with your team. How's everything going? Trust is a two-way street, as Diane said. So it's around having really effective communication. I need to be able to have a different opinion, and that's okay. That vulnerability, being able to show up and be myself. So yeah, there's lots of different elements into what creates that connection. But it's whilst we have our psychosocial risk elements that I'm sure Seamus will talk to, that really is now legislated what really is just good practice. So if you were a high-performing business and a high-performing team, so psychosocial safety and psychological safety is absolutely a foundational element to trust and healthy teams.
Love it. Would anyone like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would indeed. I think effective communication, I say that, I preach it to every one of my clients. They have to, pardon me, as a litigation lawyer, have to say almost, I reckon 90% of the matters that we get involved in, when you strip them down to the most basic elements, there's a communication breakdown. And when that breaks down, trust breaks down, you're not in a two-way street. So with surveillance, you're already putting people, they read about, oh, you're going to count my keystrokes. I want to work from home. Working from home isn't just an employee benefit. There are real benefits that come from to employers as well. But when you're working from home and then people read these cases where the Fair Work Commission has said it's fair to dismiss an employee because of their productivity, evidenced by a surveillance tool, thanks Rob, for keeping big brothers watching you at all times, you really, what you're talking about there is trust and communication. So if you say to people, if you're the person working from home and you're saying, I've got to drop my child off at school today or this morning, and so I won't be active between 9 and 10, but I'll make that time up later. What you're doing is you're just building that foundation, that trust foundation. You're having open communication. Where you don't have that, and you're not online between 9 and 10 and your employer gets robbed to check what you're doing, and suddenly you've found that there's no activity at all, you've got a problem. Yeah. And it's such a problem that you could manage with a bit of effective communication.
Yeah. Very cool. Exactly.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. So we've sort of spoken about the benefits of having a good culture of trust within our organisation and what we can do to get there. Diane, you touched on before about a lack of trust and a bit of anxiety, and I think that I'd be hard pressed to probably find someone who hasn't either experienced this personally or knows someone very close to them who has experienced this same thing, where they have that anxiety or they have that fear, in the back of their mind. I think I clicked on something, and even my family members are like, "Oh, hey Rob, yeah, because you're the IT guy, I'll ask you. I think I accidentally clicked on something, and like the anxiety that comes with that, that's very triggering. But I think in the workplace, when it's for your employer, and if you are the employee, this is towards you, can create anxiety and can make you anxious. Dan, would you like to talk to that a little bit further? How does a lack of trust make us anxious?
Absolutely. So, like I said, with the amygdala, the guard dog at the gate, when that's in control, your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, shuts down. And then what happens is the negativity. It's very instinctive in us to be negative. It was a survival mechanism back in the day when dinosaurs were running around and fun things. We couldn't say, "Oh, the dinosaur's giving me kisses, licking my face. Isn't that lovely?" No. Dinosaur is about to eat you. You need to run. So we tend to go into that negative spiral, where we start to fall into things which we call thinking traps. So things like catastrophizing. Oh, if I don't do the 2,000 keystrokes this hour, I'm going to lose my job. Then I won't have an income. How am I meant to pay my mortgage? Oh, me and the kids will be homeless, we'll be on the street. So really going to the nth degree, those really worst case scenarios. We start to think that we can read minds. I'm about to have a meeting with the boss. Oh, they're going to figure out that I clicked on that website that I shouldn't have clicked on, and then there's going to be, and we're probably going to argue. It's going to be disastrous. And most of the time, that's not the reality. It's pretty okay when you have that meeting. Or we start to be fortune tellers. When I go into that meeting, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And guess what? It doesn't happen. Even the worst thing that could happen, and it does happen, it's still not as bad as what we predict it to be in our minds. So when people start to feel this anxiety in the workplace, like I said, being on edge all the time, always on, always trying to improve, you'll be like, oh, if I stay up till 8 o'clock tonight, I will be able to get all my keystrokes in. If I actually try and really, 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 really concentrate, I won't accidentally click on the website that I shouldn't have clicked on. So what happens is they get really tired because they're working extra, they get burnt out, they get really frustrated. And honestly, I see it time and time again. It comes through my office. And people can only live like that for so long. And I've seen people leave jobs, even going to a lower level position. I have seen people leave their dream job. On paper, it's fabulous. Dream jobs. I have seen people leave positions that have a fantastic salary because you can't be on edge all the time and live like that. And if they stay and the workplace can't resolve the issues, then I've seen people become very unwell, both psychologically but physically as well. They take a lot of sick days, they have a lot of colds, they have heart issues, a whole range of things. So it's very important, that we build that trust to reduce that anxiety. And happy to talk through if you are staying up late at night worrying about work, come talk to us at Newside. We can definitely help.
Love that, that's fantastic. Thank you, Diane. Would any of our other panellists like to contribute further to that?
Thank you. I think we have seen a significant increase in workers' comp cases around with people with anxiety-based illnesses, and it just becomes a pressure point. Maybe it's effective communication or non-effective communication that gives rise to it. Where I've got to say, we're focusing on keystrokes. I don't know any employer that I deal with who looks at keystrokes. So just, I think that's got a bit of cachet because of the case, but I don't see employers fundamentally, going back to that trust issue that Diane raised, looking at keystrokes, because it's a broader picture. You're engaged, you're professionals. We're mostly professional service people in this particular room. But when you're looking at it, and I don't think your employer is going into that sort of granular level. But workers' comp claims are on the rise. Anxiety-based illnesses are on the rise. I'm sure even getting an appointment at New Psych is harder than it used to be because of the demand on services for EAP that employers are now turning to as a bit of a goal, not a solution, but certainly one of the tools that they utilise to address the psychosocial legal obligations that they have these days. I think, again, when you start to see, you need to be more attuned, both as workers but also as managers in your business, to see where people are starting to become a bit unstuck, and you need to just be more attuned to that. And it's a hard skill. Generally, managers don't go to manager school and get taught all the things that make you to be a good manager, but it's just one of those innate skills that a good manager will have, where they can see a team person or person who's reporting to them, either up or down, who's starting to become a bit unravelled.
Can I add to that?
Sorry, just to, I think the early intervention, that sounds like a big word, but it's early intervention doesn't have to be mediation. Mediation's kind of like 10,000 steps down the road. For my sins, I was once a workplace mediator, and I am not now. But it gave us great skills, that sounds silly, it gave me skills around how to ask people questions to build empathy. So if we're thinking about a high trust culture, we're often thinking about a high empathy culture, that emotional intelligence to think about, Seamus isn't quite right today. I might actually have a conversation with him about that. That's a trust building thing. We need to think about, with effective communication, where it becomes really hard, we've actually lost the opportunity to have an easier conversation earlier on. And so having these smaller conversations earlier on means that we minimise the need to then have this really big, hard conversation. And we've made assumptions, to Diane's point about how someone might respond. This resentment has been built up, and from someone who comes in and tries to support teams resetting and coming back into a trust building space, it almost becomes like a team mediation. And so it's great to think about what are the ways of working, the culture, how do we build trust as a team. Even at the very beginning, when your team's working beautifully, think about what are we doing well to embed that, so that then enables you to build the trust and the healthy conflict, etc. Because that way you can make sure that you don't get to litigation or anxiety, or you can have those opportunities to have really great conversations with people just to check in. The "Are you okay?" is such a great question that I think sometimes people take for granted. But that question, just giving someone the space to say, this is safe to talk about this, and I actually will listen. You can't just ask it and go, cool, yes, awesome, I'm out of here, but genuinely listening to the response. Those trust isn't built in these big, massive moments. Trust are these little micro moments that happen each day that build that human connection that is so important in teams, and that communication piece is a critical factor.
So there's been some really good things there, and I think probably from my perspective, I'm hearing this and going, okay, so for me and what I do and building trust, right, just because we can doesn't mean we are. So I think that anxiety inducing piece is going, maybe it may not be clear, right? Because this is a communication and trusting. It may not be clear whether my workplace is surveilling me or not. That in itself is going to build anxiety. And I think building that good trust culture and that good communication culture, you can go to people, we probably could, but why would I? Because that's not actually important to us as an organisation. Just to maybe give people that surety that, hey, yeah, just because the tools exist doesn't mean we're using them. So I think there's probably some really good examples in there of, here's what we can do, but just because we can doesn't mean we are, and you can communicate that effectively with your teams and develop and build trust with them by going through that journey, opening those lines of communications and building trust through letting them know what the expectations are and what you are and aren't doing. So that was really powerful. So the next bit coming on from that is one of my favourite pieces, and it's the always on mentality. And I think, Diane, you might have touched on it about that always on mentality. Now, there's lots of business leaders in the room. I think we're just intrinsically built like that anyway. We're just always on. We're just always thinking about our businesses and what we're doing and what's going on. And maybe that's fine for us as business leaders because we're the beneficiaries of thinking that way. But that's not necessarily the case for our teams and for our employees. So, with that in mind, and having that always on mentality for our employees, I can see how that would, again, be anxiety inducing and mentally exhausting. So, Stacey, what are some strategies that we can employ to overcome this on behalf of our employees?
The key one, and this is a do as I say, not as I do, but the key one is really about role modelling. So thinking about what those boundaries are, and as business leaders, owners, senior leaders, whatever it might be, it can be really hard to role model that. But it can be things, really practical things like when you send an email, if you're sending it late at night because it works for you, it doesn't mean it needs to land in that person's inbox late at night because it might not work for them. So putting a delay on it so it lands in their inbox at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You've got it off your to-do list, but they don't need to see it until it's in their work hours. For our team, I make sure that if they do send me emails on days that they're not working and they know, I just won't respond because I don't want to reinforce that they should be on their emails. Or the only response they'll get is, please get off your emails. So role modelling is really important, especially around those boundaries. We talked a lot with coaching clients through COVID around the importance of that third space. So the idea of having space between home and work, and that you need at least 15 minutes to sort of reset and maybe do a bit of a meditation. But you need that time to reset and think about either building into work or coming out of work. And so that third space is really important. During COVID, we talked with clients around how do you create that in an artificial space where you might be working from home. And so it might just be going for a walk around the block between getting the kids into their homeschooling at that point, but it might just be how do you create space that is I'm out of home, I'm getting into work, and then I'm out of work and coming into home. So those boundaries are really important and really practical things like having a space that is separate to your home area that you can potentially close the door on and go, that is work, this is home. But yeah, there's some things that we need to think about for our employees. And again, communication. What works for them? Have a conversation. Hey, what works for you? What can I do to support you having boundaries so that you don't always feel on? Communication, I think, is going to be the key word when we're thinking about this today. But it's, really asking people what works for them. And it's not, again, forget as Seamus said, but constantly going, how is it working? Is that still, I know that we talked about putting that in place. Is that still working? Do we need to tweak it? Do we adjust it? This need for constant two-way communication, which might sound really overwhelming, but doesn't need to be bigger than Ben-Hur. It's just these little simple check-ins that can have a huge impact.
So I think, communication's the word, but not monitoring it is the strategy.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Having a conversation with a human.
Yes, human-to-human conversations. And it's interesting, right? So, I still, like most of my team, work from the office. If it gets to 5 o'clock and they're still there working, I'm like, go home. But it's not that easy when you have people working from home. They're like, I'll just quickly get this finished up, before I go home. And, I've been having the conversations recently. It's like, it'll still be there tomorrow. You can keep working until the end of time and you'll never get through it all. Don't panic, it'll still be there tomorrow. Wind up, switch off, disconnect, and give yourself space. And I do like that third space piece that you mentioned there, Stacey. Would any of our other panellists like to elaborate on that further?
Yeah, communication is definitely the key. But also remember that if you were to roll out something and then you're having questions back and not too sure, let them know. I'm not too sure, but I'm going to find out about that. You just find that if you roll out something and you have a bit of radio silence and then say nothing, they will make it up. They will. That's when the rumours start. That's when they start to get anxious. So if rather than saying nothing, it's better to say something, which is simply just to give you an update. Nothing has really progressed on this at the moment, but we'll keep you in the loop. just for that reassurance. I think that is the big piece of communication.
Thank you. We had a partners conference recently, and we invited a few of our early career lawyers, as they're now called, because you're not allowed to call them young lawyers anymore. To give us, and they had surveyed their cohorts to work out what were the things that were working well for them and what did they want from us as partners. Their number one issue was emails sent outside of what you'd say standard business hours.
In a law firm, what are those hours?
5 to 9. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Other way around. Yeah.
9 to 5. And it was not that they were, they respect that the people, clients, partners, other people in the firm send them emails. It's the expectation, I get one outside business hours, my partner has sent it to me, I have to respond. And so it creates that anxiety, it creates that fight or flight sort of mode, and suddenly they're not getting that downtime. And so what we took on board as a partnership is to say we need to really be careful and moderate whether it's delaying the response or just holding off until the next day. When you send it at 8 o'clock at night, it's not going to get actioned. Maybe a client might have an expectation, and if that's your role as a partner or the more senior person to do it, that's yours. But otherwise, so it's just understanding where those boundaries are set. And I think the other thing that we're dancing around is what's work and what's home. And before work from home was a thing, it was very clear. Work was when you're physically sitting at your desk or in a factory or a premises, and home was when you weren't there. Now those two have blurred. Workplace Surveillance Act has a definition of at work, so it defines it as being either in the premises or where you are doing work for your employer. So that's a pretty broad definition. Case law, common law, has a much more varied approach to it, and so it takes into a range of factors that are relevant to the circumstances of the case before the court or tribunal. But basically, if you are doing, say for instance in the Fair Work Commission, we've had decisions where people on groups like, or platforms, social platforms like Snapchat, have been saying things about other employees to a closed group of people. It's never closed. It always comes out. Someone finds out about it. They then disciplined because what they're saying is a breach of the company's policies. And that has been found to be at work because it was amongst a group of people, work colleagues, about issues at work. So the line as to what's work and what's home has been blurred. And so I think if we're trying to manage psychosocial risks and health, the more we can delineate between the two, have the third space where you know when I go from this zone to that zone, I'm in my wind down or wind up part. I think that will help a lot of the anxiety issues and the communication and all of the other issues we're talking about today.
Amazing. In case anyone's wondering, if you want to know how to become a partner at Spark Helmore in the workplace practice, it's by having telepathy, because he actually just answered the next question I had on my list. So practice your telepathy and you'll get there. And it was going to be my next question, Seamus, thank you. Was just talking about knowing the boundaries between work and home life. And I want to do an example, and this isn't something that anybody's prepared for, by the way. You mentioned earlier that you go, one of the panelists mentioned, between 9 and 10, I'm going to go drop my children at school, right? So I'll be online from 10 and I'll work until, I don't know, whenever, however that works. And one of the things that you did mention was around the definition of sort of being at work. And I think probably historically the lazy way of measuring that was just going, okay, if you're here between these hours, then that's when you're working, right? But those lines have been blurred and we now have a little bit of flexibility in our workplace. Something I would like to understand is, and probably further to that, understanding the boundaries of work and home life is, what is the right to disconnect as some new legislation coming? What impact is that going to have on that? Because based on our traditional or our historic understanding, we go, you're set, you work 8 hours a day, and if you go from 9 till 5, but today you're going to be working 10 till 6, what's that going to look like? How's that actually going to work in practice and understanding where those boundaries are between work-home life?
I'll give a legal answer, but I think the practical answer is going to be better than the legal answer. The legal answer is the new laws about right to disconnect commence on the 26th of August this year for large employers or businesses with 15 or more employees, and a year later for small business employers. I think to me the right to disconnect is just codifying what the law already probably provided. We had a maximum number of hours, we had reasonable additional hour provisions, but they were pretty hard for employees to actually activate to say, I think I'm being treated in breach of those obligations. So I think the right to disconnect gives a right to bring the matter before the Fair Work Commission. Importantly, to understand it's a right that an employee can bring, but it's also a right that an employer can bring if they think that there's an unreasonable refusal to connect. So it's a two-way street. I'm not sure what it's actually going to do in practice that's not actually already activated by way of policies, contract, good communication, particularly now. I mean, if you work in a factory, it's easy. You bundy on, you bundy off, you know when you work. Professional services, work from home, those hours, we just don't have bundy clocks. It doesn't work in that way. So I think the practical answer is probably going to be more relevant than the legal answer.
Absolutely, and we've spoken about communication. That's what it is. Saying, what are your needs? What do you need? Do you need some flexibility with your work hours? And then putting that into practice. Setting your expectations. I don't expect you to work these hours, but if you want that flexibility, I might send you a few things your way. Getting it in writing, putting it down, a mutual agreement definitely is needed. But I think it comes back down to that communication, talking about what your employees need and what you're willing to offer around that flexibility.
And I think, again, it's what your employees need, what your clients need, what your customers need, and constantly having that conversation of this is all a balance, right? All of these conversations are, we need to hold this tension in here. And effective communication can help us do that as well as we possibly can. Understanding what's the norm versus what's the exception to the norm is also really important too. So, but yeah, I think having it in writing and constantly checking back over it, not set and forget, but also being outcomes focused, not it's 9:05, why are you late? But just being more, so what did you achieve today and how do we focus on that?
That's good, and I think I'm sorry for this. I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole here because I can't help myself. So we talked about flexibility in work hours, and we touched on the right to disconnect and what that's potentially going to look like. But maybe as another example in practice, okay, I need to go drop the kids off, or my children are off doing their athletics carnival. I think that's happening in a fortnight's time, right? And I just want to go and see that, right? I want to go and do that for an hour or two in the morning. So I'm just going to bump my hours back. And invariably, what's going to happen is I'm in a customer-facing role. So what's going to happen is emails and communications are going to hit my customers and my customers' employees after hours. That's just going to happen. So I'm thinking as probably broader implications, of the right to disconnect is not just within your own teams, but potentially how you're engaging with other people's teams. And these may be customers or suppliers or whoever they happen to be. Food for thought maybe, or some consideration. Did anyone want to make comment on that in any capacity?
Yes, we already review that under flexible work conditions at the moment. So it is tough to manage during like a customer-focused job, but there's always negotiation. There's always some kind of flexibility, I say. So you might be able to say, well, we can't do that 5 days a week, but we could do it maybe 3 or 4. And then another day, you work on key projects or something like that. So I think there's always scope for negotiation, but businesses are currently doing that under flexible work arrangements.
And if you don't, you'll probably won't retain your staff. So there's legal requirements, right to disconnect, flexible work arrangements. There's all these legal requirements, but we know that our unemployment rate in the Hunt is sitting at 3.1%. So that war for talent is intense. And flexibility used to be a differentiator for employers. It's now just a flat minimum base. So there's the legal requirement, but there's just thinking about talking with your teams, what motivates them, what attracts them, what retains them, because having that really clear employee value proposition that is unique to your organisation and why people should work with you from a wellbeing point of view is really important.
And I might just say that I guess everyone in this room has been sick, so not able to go to work. So it's going to happen. So like as a manager, it's going to happen with your teams. Most people in this room will have kids or know people who have kids. And so the child milestones that you want to see, they're going to happen. So I think if you want to have the best talent, you want to look like an employer that has not just a statement about empathy and values, but you actually live those values, you're just going to need to embrace those things. The problem from looking at it the other way, where we get involved, the employee is sick when they know there's a deadline, and then you get this pattern of sick leave where it's always on the deadline time. There's underlying issues there that need to be looked at and considered, but the right to be sick and be absent for personal leave is a legal right, and you're entitled not to be subjected to a detriment because of it. So it's just a bit of a flexibility. It's a two-way street. We're all employees, but some of us are also business owners, and so you need to try to strike a balance between those two.
Yeah, and I think probably that right to disconnect piece and sick leave and work from home. I mean, people have the ability to do it, and they go, I'm sick, I don't want to bring my germs to the office, but I can do some work while I'm here. I'm just go and lay in bed and do something, it'll be fine, we'll deal with it. Sometimes it's not that easy, particularly when you talk about deadlines and bits and pieces, and people go, oh, but I'll just do this bit. And they get trapped in that, I'm sick, I'm meant to be resting and taking time off, but invariably they don't end up doing it. So it's actually a good thought there. All right, so one of the things that certainly I'm very passionate about is, in our business, the way that we measure things is we go, okay, we have goals and targets, we either achieve them or we don't achieve them, right? And they might be growth targets, they might be, sort of performance targets or whatever they happen to be, right? Or financial targets. We just go, this is where we want to be, right? And there's plenty of CPAs in the room. Think about financial targets. We want to achieve these particular numbers. But interestingly, when we're talking about our employees, commonly we're going, you have to work 8 hours per day. I don't care what you do with your 8 hours, but you have to be on for 8 hours. This is the catalyst for surveillance commonly, or when people ask me, oh, I don't think they're working the full 8 hours. And I always just say to them, does it matter? Like, aren't you measuring results? Doesn't matter if they're working 5 minutes or 15 hours. Like, as long as they're achieving the result that you're employing them and paying them to achieve, does it really matter? Stacey, I know that you're big on this, and I know that you're almost as passionate as me about this particular topic. We have had many conversations about this. Can you talk to this and about changing our sort of employee performance metrics away from time in versus result delivered, and how we build a culture of that within our organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am very passionate about this because, again, this can be a differentiator and something that can really help you from an engagement perspective with your team. We were talking about ebbs and flows potentially of work from a CPA perspective coming into the end of the standard Australian financial year. But also whether that happens in law firms, and you guys have just been in like an ebb flow for like 4 years now. But I mean, in our business, there's always ebbs and flows, and we see that a lot in our clients' businesses as well. The need to focus on, so what's that output? For us, it's things like delivery of leadership development programs and quality over quantity. Thinking about what are the size of the clients that we're working with, how many retainers we might be able to deliver. But it's the output of what's being delivered, and client satisfaction is one of our key drivers, as opposed to 9 to 5. Because we know that sometimes that's going to have to be 8 till 6, and I don't want to have to pay for the extra hours when that happens. But sometimes that's going to be 10 till 3 because athletics carnivals or performances, whatever it might be. By focusing, we had a grad join our business a couple of years ago, and we had our quietest quarter ever in Q2 last year, and she was like, "Is it always like this?" I said, "Hang on, baby, you just got to make the most of this moment, because when it kicks in, it'll kick in hard." And so about 2 months ago, she looked at me and went, "Oh, now I know what you mean." Like, yeah. And so here we are, we're holding on tight. So thinking about how we focus more on outcomes, thinking about how we focus more on what are the things that drive your business, whether that is financial, and obviously that is one component, but thinking about the whole balanced scorecard. So from a financial perspective, from a process perspective, from a customer perspective, and from your people perspective, what are going to be those targets that link into enabling your strategy that if you look at them, none of them are, my team will be here 9 to 5 each day. So really reflect on why then is clock watching important and what's actually the detriment or the negative impact that has, as opposed to how you might be able to shift that mindset. Because we know that future generations who are coming through expect it. And it might be hard for us to rewire. I've had to rewire because of the work ethic that I've been taught in my family. But I need to really think about if I catch myself going, "Oh, mate, like it's 4 o'clock. Seriously? I'm still here till 6. But now I go, why does that matter? And I had to catch myself. Oh no, it actually doesn't matter. Because I know that tomorrow you actually need to be in Sydney by 7 o'clock. Or I know that actually you've nailed it out of the park this week and you've done everything I've asked you to do. Enjoy, because I know that will come back in spades."
Amazing. I feel like I get an early mark this afternoon for coming to breakfast. So can the rest of you.
Do I too?
Would anyone like to elaborate further or share any further commentary on that one?
Always good for a lawyer to have another thing to say. I guess if that's a looking glass, we probably look at it more the other way around, which is additional hours rather than hours up to your ordinary hours. And unfortunately, with the prevalence of wage underpayments or wage theft, as it's now commonly referred to, keeping a track of hours worked is important, and particularly not only just a track of hours, but a track of hours compared to minimum entitlements. And so it is harder when people are working from home in these flexible arrangements to actually understand what the core hours are, or for instance, if somebody's working excessive hours outside their core hours. So there needs to be some, I think from our perspective, where we see cases brought by the Ombudsman for underpayment scenarios, which to scare you, which is probably the jail comment, can go beyond the company to people who are involved in a contravention. Could be all of you, could be me. Those cases focus on record keeping, and so having a record of hours worked can still be a very important thing. I think what we generally tend to say in professional services environments where people work, like my team works long hours, we're constantly just checking in to see, are those hours so much that somebody's becoming affected by it? And if they are, we try and just say time in lieu, or to try and balance the scorecard in some way. So there is actually, and sure, they're paid significantly for the work that they do, and lawyers don't have an award, so we're not up against an award claim or award breach claim, but it is useful to have a record of some of the hours that are worked so that you can manage the underpayment risk, but also the psychosocial risks as well.
Yeah, and that's probably a really strong segue into my next question that I had. And I suppose I'll start this question with a statement, and that's that workers' compensation mental health claims average 17 weeks of lost time with a median cost, roughly, of about $27,000 per claim. So that's almost 3 times a physical injury claim in workers' compensation. So understanding that as a risk to business, is surveillance a psychosocial hazard that may lead to this type of claim? And I suspect, based on our previous feedback, we already know the answer, but please, panellists, if you are able to share your thoughts and wisdom on that.
It is a risk because you have a duty under the Work Health and Safety Act to positively manage those risks. I think anxiety, and I will defer to my colleagues here because it's much more of a diagnosis rather than an employer issue. But where we get involved, a claim is made, then the insurer is making a decision about liability. Where an employer can actually give information to the insurer to say, in respect of a psychological injury, that they've taken reasonable steps in a reasonable manner, it can help the insurer to get to a point where they may decide to deny liability. It doesn't happen often, I got to say, because it's very hard to disprove that somebody has an anxiety condition that arises from work. But that's where we would say that reasonable action taken reasonably, again, fundamentals, communication, effective communication, rules, telling people, checking in, all of those things are reasonable action taken reasonably, but it's probably more of an issue for you.
Yeah, I've seen lots of workers' compensation claims. Usually comes to me at the pointy end when they're very unwell. But with my HR background, I did see them at the dispute stage and have to intervene. So communication is big here. Honestly, I see a lot of stuff and I think, what? Why didn't some intervention happen? Oh yes, I went to my boss and I said I wasn't coping with my workload, and they said, oh, why don't you just take a couple of weeks off? That'll fix everything. Guess what? It doesn't. They go back, they have a couple of weeks off, they go back into the workplace and wow, look at my emails. Guess what? No one was filling in for me while I was away. And it exacerbates it. They go back to their boss again. There's heaps of emails. I was 2 weeks off. I haven't done anything. Could you please look at my workload? Yeah, okay. We might review your PD. We'll sit down. Okay. Weeks go by. They don't hear anything. Everything's compounding. They're getting anxious. There's more and more work, and there's been no resolve. So I think part of it is, we need to intervene very early. You need to communicate very well with your staff. Look, I don't have a quick fix. I don't have a quick fix at the moment, but I'm working on it. What are your suggestions? Do you have any ideas about your workload? Let's start to take notes about your workload. Yes, your quick fix is let's hire 2 more people, but we can't do that. But let's monitor little things. Like, do you really have to, attend that meeting face to face? Could it be Zoom? Because that's, an hour or so travel. Let's cut that down. Let's have a look at some of the clunky systems you're using. It's taking me 2 hours for this database, this system. Can we have a look at different processes? Like, there's lots we can do. So we tend to go, oh, we can't fix this, straight away. It's too hard, too scary. Just take 2 weeks off work. So it's about really looking at it. If you don't know, escalate and ask others. But I do see a lot of the workers' compensation claims that there could have been some resolve at the very beginning, and I think communication is a big one before it escalated to that point where they think, what else can I do? I'll go straight workers' comp, see the doctor.
Yeah, I think that job design piece, I know that is one of the psychosocial hazards, but it's the ability to have those conversations. And we often talk with organisations around finite mindset versus infinite, or growth mindset versus fixed. And often we do hear that I just need more staff. We've got a talent shortage, but also we've got budgetary constraints. And so being clear with team members around, so what are the fixed elements that we can't change? And then let's brainstorm together. So instead of going, this is your problem or this is my problem, let's sit together and think about how we work through it. Because also if it's happening for one person, it's actually probably happening for more, they're just not talking about it. So it's that sort of canary in the mine shaft kind of piece. It's that opportunity to think about maybe there's another way that we could do this as well.
Very good, thank you team. So I suppose my final question to the panel, and Diane, we might start with you around this one, is so now we have a better understanding of the impacts of workplace surveillance, how it can potentially impact team culture and trust within our organisation, and what invariably impact that has on wellness, being a psychosocial risk or hazard within the workplace. Where it is needed, and I think we'll just go right back to the start when I was talking about, when we talk about surveillance, we're going, it's monitoring keystrokes and making sure that people are doing work. It's actually more than that. So there are other reasons why we may need to do it, and it can be for safety, and incident management as an example. It might be for cybersecurity. I know that, for me as an IT provider, we have the keys to the kingdom, right? We can see everything. One of the things that we don't do is look, because quite frankly, we don't care. But we could, we have the tools and the availability to do it. So if we do need to have some form of surveillance within the workplace, how can we do that effectively where it's needed? And also, mitigating the wellness impacts that something like that may have.
Absolutely. So if you do need to do it, we've spoken about communication so much today. Communicate with your staff. Say exactly what's going on. What we tend to do is we go, right, this is what we're going to do, everybody, and this is how we're going to roll it out. We don't actually tell people the why. Why are we doing it? Even if it's to promote something positive, even if it's, we want to do this because it might actually lead to more resources. If you don't tell them that, they're going to go into that negative mindset and start to think, oh, this is so they can sack half the staff. So we have to tell them why. And you'll be surprised, once you tell them why, they might have brilliant ideas. They might come up and say, well, if we're doing this because of this, I've got a brilliant idea, or we might not even need surveillance in the end anyway. So you'd be surprised at what ideas that they come up with. Don't set and forget. Businesses grow, you downsize. Don't just go, right, we've got the surveillance in place, tick box, great, let's move on. Constantly review it. Is it actually achieving the goals that you set? Do we have to tweak it a little bit? Maybe we have to scrap it and start from scratch. So constantly review it. Also, try not to use it as a tool for negative purposes. So as humans, we want to improve. We have to improve. We want to fix things so that we can get better, so that we can survive and move on and do good. So we tend to go, oh, you've only sent this amount of emails. So we tend to kind of pounce on that, where we don't go, you know what? The monitoring has actually told me that you're doing, over and above. Well done, good job. You'd be surprised at the power of a thank you. Just stopping and saying, good job, thank you, rather than constantly pouncing all the time. So reward is always a really good thing.
Strength of positive reinforcement, I love it.
Yes.
I'm just going to pick up a couple of comments that Diane's made. The first one is, I think you said, as a manager, talk to other managers. You don't have to do this on your own. So that's fundamental, I think, to take away from today is, whilst managing a team with these risks around surveillance and productivity and all of those things, you feel like you need to be the best, share your experiences, because I think you'll learn from your experiences. The other one was, as humans, we want to do the best that we can. I don't know why Google was invented then, because Dr. Google, when you're feeling unwell, is definitely not a great way of feeling the best that you can. The final thing for me as well is the Privacy Act is under review, has been for the last 4 years. And so there's going to be some pretty significant changes to the provisions around collection, storage, rights to access for personal information and sensitive information. The employee records exemption is being looked at by the Parliament as to whether it still remains fit for purpose. That exemption allows employers a bit of a free hit to avoid the Australian privacy principles if it relates to a practice directly related to the employment relationship. So if that changes, either it goes or it changes fundamentally, all of this workplace surveillance, all of this personal information that you're collecting about your employees is going to need to be considered under the lens of the new Privacy Act considerations as well. So that's just one to put on your radar to be aware of.
Sensational. All right, well, you can hand it back to Stacey anyway. We are out of time, so what I would like from our three panellists is one very, very quick key takeaway that people should walk away from today's session with. One, Stacey, just one.
Communicate.
Trust.
Enjoy work.
Very good. Thank you so much to our panellists for today. We really appreciate your time and input.